you all ready? Cool.
Yeah,
It's a big production as the director here, huh?
Yes. A lot of behind the scenes stuff.
A lot of moving pieces, I bet.
Yeah, so I tried to get it here early to get set up. So hopefully.
Yeah, perfect. Okay.
Yep.
You know what? It'll be whatever it is at this point, right?
Agreed.
All right, sounds good.
Okay.
Talk to you later.
Mhm. Okay, welcome everybody. I'm so glad that we're here and we made it to the end of the semester. You should be really proud of all of your work and how challenging I'm sure it's been, and the projects that you've undertaken. So this is really, really great work. So I'm going to share my screen, and just so you know, this is live on our YouTube streaming site right now, and it'll stay up there. So if you had anybody that you interviewed or any friends or family that you wanted to share it with, it will remain up there, and so they could watch it at any time. Okay, so let me pull this up and then share my screen. Okay, and so you all know, like, if anything ever happens with the technology, just hang on. But I'm on campus right now, so hopefully we should be good. Let me see, can I make that a little bit smaller? It's not fully sharing it. Interesting. I think it's not sharing the whole screen. Okay, well, we can just pull it up from here. Actually, give me 1 second. I'm going to pull up a backup of this that I have. Okay, let's see if maybe this will work. Yeah. It doesn't like when I go full screen. Okay, we'll just go from here. Okay, so I want to thank everybody for all of your really important work that you did this semester. You've taken on projects that were really important to each of you, things that you really cared about. And then went out and interviewed individuals who were connected to that topic in some way, who were advocates or who have been working on in social movements or, to better their communities. So you created 5 podcasts. Each of them were roughly about 20 minutes, and one group actually did another second podcast that we'll put up on our page as well. And, you did the research, did the interviews, wrote the scripts, edited them, recorded them, and then edited all of that together. And I have to say that this semester, this is some of the highest quality podcasts that have come up. So kudos to all of you. Okay, so hopefully everything will work well. Let's see. I actually may need to switch back to my other one. Let me switch my sharing. Okay. So our first podcast is going to be our shark conservation podcast. So could somebody give a little introduction to this, and then I'll pull up the podcast itself.
Yeah, I can give a brief introduction for our podcast. So with this podcast, we wanted to focus on shark conservation. This was kind of triggered by like the recent shark attacks over the summer. And so we kind of were thinking about like, well, what's the future for sharks, right? Especially as interactions between humans and sharks increase. And so we interviewed Emily Spurgeon, who's a shark researcher, and that's going to make up a big chunk of our podcast. So yeah, that was the main focus of it. And we had a really great conversation. And we really wanted to highlight it because of how unique the ecosystem off of the California coast is, and how integral sharks are in terms of our ecosystem and ecosystems around the world.
Thanks. Okay, I'll pull it up.
Arango and Matthew Novak, in conjunction with HCOM 340S.
Everybody, my name is Matt Novak, and I will be introducing you guys to our topic, which would be sharks. We're going to be going over a variety of issues and information, along with a really cool interview that we all were able to take part of, and we're able to discuss some issues and hear from professionals about what's going on with the sharks in Monterey Bay. Some of the things we'll go over is, what is a shark and why are they important? Why are they such a big, important piece to the ocean's ecosystem? What issues the sharks are facing in their habitat? How our community is currently impacted by these issues. We'll be going over the perception of sharks and our local issues of why should we care and why are we talking about this here? Shark sighting in Monterey Bay and sharks in SoCal to begin with. Talking about the bigger issues of climate change and the disruption of their habitat and how they're living and why they're migrating over here. And just reinforcing how serious the issue is of, what the sharks are facing and the ecosystem of the ocean. And then some key takeaways and solution to these sharks issues, ways to raise awareness around our community and make a change, and just some thoughts throughout our team. This is going to be a great podcast. We're really looking forward to discussing some of these issues with all of you and hope to raise awareness for these sharks and make sure that everybody knows what's going on. So handing this over to Jane.
We interviewed marine researcher Emily Spurgeon and discussed a variety of topics concerning sharks. We discussed her research on juvenile white sharks, what makes a shark, their important role in marine ecosystems, the biggest threats to sharks, and much more.
My name is Emily Spurgeon, and I'm a grad student and a full-time research technician at the Cal State Long Beach Shark Lab. From Minnesota originally, and I went to Cal Poly to do my undergrad. Really started doing a lot of scientific diving and boosting my field skills there, and then came to Cal State Long Beach in 2019 to start grad school on my research on juvenile white sharks.
Can you tell a little bit more about the Shark Lab, maybe a little bit more in depth about your current research?
Yeah, so the Shark Lab was founded in the 60s by Dr. Don Nelson, and he's kind of the pioneer of a lot of technology that researchers still use all across the globe to track animals in general, especially sharks. Chris Lowe, our current advisor, took over in 1998 from the Shark Lab. He did his PhD in Hawaii, and he was also a grad student at the Shark Lab before then. He's been here ever since, and 3 years ago in 2019, we got a $3.2 million grant from the state to study white sharks because they're so super close to the shore. They share a lot of popular beaches with people, and so the state kind of wanted us to dive into why are they at these beaches, what are they doing when they're at these beaches, to help inform lifeguards kind of what's happening, as well as to just overall the public, to boost public awareness and public safety. So that's our Shark Beach Safety Program. It's kind of what I got brought into. So my project is under that big grant and under that Shark Beach Safety to kind of help inform what are these sharks doing when they're at these really near shore beaches.
What inspired you to specifically study juvenile sharks?
I love the mystery around sharks. As you guys probably know, there's so much that we don't know about them. And I never thought that I would study white sharks because, great whites in the movies are so charismatic. And I never thought that I would study them. I always thought I would study smaller species of sharks, but we know surprisingly little about white sharks, like where they give birth, where they're mating, especially the juveniles. We know that they're born 4 to 5 feet long, and up to 10 feet, they can still be considered a juvenile. but we don't really know that much about the juveniles because a lot of research is really focused on the adults, and we just haven't had the funds or technology to study the babies. And so this is kind of the first time we've been able to do this at this scale, and it's really exciting because we've never had the money to do it. And even in like Australia and South Africa and other places, like they don't have the funding and means to do the kind of research that we're doing right now. So it's exciting to be able to be the first to kind of dive in.
Do you think that like mystery kind of adds to the fear that people have of, especially if the juveniles are staying closer to shore? Is that like where a lot of the fear comes from like...
Oh yeah, I think so, because people have been seeing white sharks in Southern California for 10 like decades, but they've never really understood that they're juveniles, and especially since people don't realize how different the juveniles are from the adults. Like the babies, they eat completely different things, they're in a completely different climate, they're really temperature sensitive, whereas the adults really aren't. And so there's a lot of differences. And so when people say that, oh, there's a white shark near the beach, it could be a 6-foot long baby, but people just assume it's the same characteristics and same habits as the adults, where they're here for the seals, they're going to eat the surfers, like the same kind of to fear. So that's what's really exciting. I like studying the babies because we get to kind of burst all of those fears by people saying, no, well, they're actually here eating small fish and stingrays, and they're hiding and they're super skittish. Like we have got videos of the sharks being scared of a piece of kelp in the water. Like they're super skittish because the bigger ones will eat the babies. And so they're staying really close to shore to kind of hide from the adults as well. So people just kind of don't realize that they're here for protection and safety as well, that they're not just here to eat the surfers. So it definitely adds to the fear, just not knowing about the juveniles.
Is that just with the white sharks, or is that most shark species in terms of the juveniles and the adults?
Yeah, I think a lot of shark species have differences in their diet as they age, and differences in where they migrate and where they live. But I don't think, because they're not as high profile as white sharks, for example, like lemon sharks, for the first 3 years of their life, they're going to hang out in a mangrove super close to shore, really shallow water. They'll grow there for like 3 to 4 years, and then they'll move offshore. The adults have completely different movement, and they eat completely different things, but people aren't really scared of baby lemon sharks or anything because they're small. So I think white sharks being born 4 to 5 feet long and being 10 feet and still considered a baby is pretty intimidating.
How would you describe a shark? I guess like what they look like, basic anatomy, or like what makes them a shark compared to, let's say, other types of fish.
Yeah, so I would say, they're a cartilaginous fish. So I would tell people the same material that your nose and your ears are made of. The sharks have their skeleton is made up of that material rather than, calcium like ours. They have gills to breathe just like other fish, and they also have additional senses. So what makes sharks really special is that in addition to, the touch, smell, taste, sight, they also have electromagnetic reception, which is they can sense, electric pulses in the water. So if a fish is hiding in the sand, a shark can detect that. That's kind of what makes a lot of sharks special. It's hard to narrow it down because they're so different. Like sharks can range in max size from 6 inches, up to 45 feet, and they can live as little as like a couple years to as old as 500 years. And they've been on this planet for 400 million years, and they're just a perfect example of evolution. If I say like picture a shark, most people think of like a reef shark style where they're all gray, really sleek fins, tall for like first dorsal fin, little second dorsal fin. So everyone kind of thinks like a reef shark when they think of a shark, like a stereotypical shark. Everyone has that one image of sharks in their head. A lot of people don't realize when I tell them that, if they see a shark laying on the bottom, like a horn shark or a swell shark or something, see it laying on the bottom, they're like, oh, can it breathe? So a lot of people don't realize that even that's different, where some sharks have to swim to breathe and some sharks don't have to swim to breathe. It's always fun seeing what misconceptions they have about like, oh, all sharks are the same. My favorite is telling people about the epaulet shark that can walk on land.
They're one of my favorites.
Crazy, right?
Okay, so what role do sharks play in the wild, and specifically in terms of ecosystem off the California coast?
Yeah, so sharks are, we always hear the sharks apex predators. They can control a lot of systems and ecosystems. So if you take out sharks in ecosystem, it kind of is that trophic cascade of animals. So they're really good at population control for species, as well as like cleaning up the ocean, because they'll eat a lot of like dead carcasses and like dead things as well, like a lot of smaller sharks at least. And in Southern California, they're really important because of that same trophic cascading effect. So a lot of our white sharks especially will eat, when they're adults, marine mammals, then those marine mammals will eat, other things that maybe might be devastating kelp forests. So the juvenile sharks, for example, they're eating a lot of squids and invertebrates and rays and stuff, which when left unchecked can also kind of, like any other system, cause a trophic cascade of events down the food chain. But I think any shark in an ecosystem is a sign of a healthy one.
Hi all, Denise here, and I'm going to hit a little bit on why are sharks important. So sharks, like many other animal populations, are rapidly declining. However, sharks are of a special importance because, as discussed in the interview, they are apex predators that keep the marine food chain balanced. Without them, this food chain could collapse, causing devastating effects not only on underwater, but on land too. Millions of people depend on seafood as one of their primary resources of food, making it crucial that marine resources and ecosystems are protected and sustainably managed. Wasteful fishing practices, climate change, misplaced fear, and shark finning are a few of the forces driving the decline in shark populations. In this next part of the interview, we will go more in depth into these issues.
All right, wonderful segue there. So that is the nature of this first question here. So what are some of the most important issues faced by sharks right now, in your professional opinion? My follow-up is, how have we seen some of these issues become relevant here in California?
Yeah,
So-
so a lot of, there's like a wide range of issues. So for a lot of species that aren't like white sharks and whatnot, obviously like bycatch is a big issue, and like other fishing for sharks, because a lot of, like, for example, we worked with Fish and Wildlife about 3 years ago, which they confiscated boxes of about 10,000 shark jaws, and all of them were claiming to be one certain species, but we ended up identifying every single one of them, and there was endangered species there and a bunch of other like juvenile, like freshly born babies there, but it was just all like the black market trade and all that kind of stuff. So the big issues is like how little money you can really get for a shark. Like fishermen don't really get that much money for a shark, and so they have to catch a lot of them to kind of make it worth it. And then like their jaw trade and teeth and fins, obviously. But I'd say like overfishing is definitely the biggest issue facing the majority of sharks. Not obviously like the deep water sharks and some other ones, but in our system, that's why in 1996, I want to say, sometime in the 90s, there was a nearshore gillnet ban that went in place for fishermen, and that protected a ton of baby white sharks. And so in addition to that, we had, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, and that boosted, we're now just seeing kind of the effects of that, but that like nearshore gillnet ban, which had a lot of bycatch for our baby white sharks, ever since they stopped being able to ban or fish within 3 miles of the coastline, it's saving so many other sharks. So I'd say fishing is definitely the biggest threat for sharks.
How do these issues with sharks affect us in terms of economy, recreation, tourism, etc.? How do shark problems affect humans?
Yeah, we're really seeing that a lot, in the Indo-Pacific. So because so many sharks are being fished, now that influences ecotourism, where they might not go out and see any sharks, and that especially for other fish that might rely on sharks to keep their populations boosted, we're seeing now that these other fish species are kind of disappearing. And so whether that's directly linked with the sharks disappearing or not, the overfishing is a huge issue in our oceans, and the fish just can't bounce back without the sharks, and the fish, because of other predators that are now eating them and these other things. But yeah, it's pretty devastating both on our economy, just for being able to sell fish and being able to just have that kind of market, as well as ecotourism, because if there's no sharks and there's no things in the area, then there's no money now going into that country or that community for the shark diving.
Speaking specifically on, impacts to tourism, I know here in the Monterey Bay over this summer, we had 2 separate incidents of white sharks appearing and, clashing with humans off of very popular beach-going beaches. I believe you probably have some pretty good insight as to the how and why.
Sharks don't care about people at all. Like they either ignore them or when they do have an interaction, it's very brief, and there's different water users. Like they get closest to swimmers. They get the farthest away from, larger objects. So like the larger the thing is, the farther away that they get, because the smaller it is, they obviously don't see it as a big of a threat. Shark bites don't really influence the economy that negatively. So while a shark bite might stop people from visiting and stop people from, coming and spending money in that town, but people that are going to go in the ocean, like surfers and paddleboarders that live there, aren't going to stop going in the ocean if there's a shark bite, essentially. Like we had one woman recently get bit down here. It wasn't fatal, it wasn't bad, it was just one of the babies kind of just like boinked her leg, just like, and then released, but people were in the water the next day.
What are things that we can do to help these issues or to raise awareness?
Raising awareness is the biggest thing that we can do. So we kind of spend our entire summers going all over Southern California just to try to educate the public on not only what animals are out there, but how to be safe in the water, because obviously these are apex predators that are very capable animals. And so always like informing people, if you do go in the water, stay in a group, how to interact with a shark. So if they do see a shark in the wild, what to do. So make eye contact with it, never turn your back to it, and just calmly swim back to shore and that kind of thing. So the more we can inform the public on both the shark behavior as well as what to do in that scenario, I think it'll kind of alleviate some of that mystery, like we were talking about before, where if they can, the more they understand them, the less that they might fear what's happening.
Tell us a bit more, like where do you go? Who are you talking to? What more are you telling?
Yeah, so we have about 3 or 4 different programs that we do. So we have our JAW programs, those JAWs I mentioned earlier. We box them up and ship them all over the country to teachers, and so that they can use it. We developed a curriculum to just educate about the teeth and different morphologies of sharks, so how different sharks eat different things based on their location and their size and the shape of their teeth. So that kind of hits the first head of like, not all sharks are meant to eat people. They're not here for marine mammals. Most sharks eat small fish, other things. And so we have that program educating about their teeth and their jaws. And we also have the thing called Shark Shacks that we take to beaches. It's kind of like a pop-up tent with a bunch of stuff on the table. And that's where we bring like tangible things that people can to feel and touch, because no one really gets to touch sharks or even see them outside of like a picture, an aquarium or something. And so we'll bring like the fins, the skin, the eyeballs, the parts of the shark, just so we can teach them about like the anatomy of the shark and what they're doing when they're at these beaches, as well as we bring a lot of our technologies to show people how we're tracking them. Because the more we can say people, all right, we're actively monitoring these individuals, that also might kind of relieve that stress where we know where they are, we're figuring out what they're doing, and we're working with the lifeguards. The more we can, raise awareness, we can hopefully prevent negative interactions, because I know in San Diego, a lot of the people, because they think the white sharks are eating sea lions, they kind of want the white sharks gone, and that might be promoting that poaching. Where if we can go to these beaches and say, here's a stingray, this is what the sharks are eating, and this is how they're eating them, and based on the shape of their teeth and all these different things, this is what they're doing. So that's a big part of our outreach, is just like educating on like physiology, anatomy, behavior of these sharks, as well as how we track them, where they're going, or how to be safe in the water.
Well, I think we've reached just about the end here. We have one more question for you, one last nugget of wisdom we'd like to gain from you. So do you have any parting thoughts you'd like to share? Anything about what we've discussed, or maybe something we haven't touched on that you think is important for people to know about sharks or shark conservation?
The biggest thing that I always want people to remember is that obviously science is a process, and there's not one end-all be-all solution to conservation for sharks. Like while fishing is a big part of it, temperature is also a big influence for these animals. So, climate change might be influencing where they're moving, how long they're staying at these beaches. And so it's a really complicated system, and these sharks are doing things for a lot of the same reasons that people might potentially, like they're moving because they're too cold in the winter, just like snowbirds going to Florida, or they might be being different places in the water column because they're going to risk to get a snack like I might do in the middle of the night. The sharks have very similar potential behaviors as people, and so that's kind of what I want a lot of people to take home with, where we're very complex. There's not one reason we do anything, and sharks are very similar. And so with their conservation, with the research on them, it's a huge team effort of understanding kind of where they are and where they're going. And the public, how they can help is a lot of different ways.
Emily said it best. Science is a process. For everything we know about sharks, there's so much more we don't fully understand. But what we do understand, and what we've come to understand here through our research and our talk with Emily, is that A, sharks are awesome, ancient forces of nature still running the seas today. B, sharks are facing threats from practically all sides. And C, we really, really need sharks around to be able to understand them fully, to be able to safeguard the health of our ocean ecosystems, and to be able to figure out how to coexist comfortably with them. It's in all of our best interests to protect and preserve these primordial, badass animals.
All right, wonderful work. Great job. That was very informative. A lot of education involved in that podcast. Okay, so let's go to our next group. The Girl Power podcast. Could somebody introduce this?
So for our podcast, our group chose to focus on women's inequality within the workforce. In this podcast, we interviewed Veronica Garcia, a crisis intervention case manager who is a huge advocate for gender equality.
Thank you.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Girl Power Podcast. Our names are Janet, Melissa, Kefon, Sophia, and Mara Teresa. We are 5 girls from all around that came together with the same passion for supporting females. With that being said, we are joined today with another female with that same passion, Veronica Garcia. Podcast today, we will be talking about various topics that have to do with gender inequality in the workplace. Did you know about 4 in 10 women face discrimination in the workplace? That's about 42% of the population in the United States. Please give a warm welcome to our special guest, Veronica Garcia, and one of my co-hosts, Janet. Hi guys, how are you guys doing today?
Hey Melissa, we're doing great here, thanks. And I'm here with our guest, Veronica Garcia. Let's give her a welcome.
So my name's Veronica Garcia. I work as a crisis intervention case manager for Monarch Services. I provide direct services to survivors of domestic violence, human trafficking, and sexual assault. It is a nonprofit organization, and a lot of what I do is peer counseling, advocacy, case management. And I also do follow-ups for after a case has gotten a SAFE. So a SAFE is a sexual assault forensic exam. So we're part of the SART team, which is a sexual assault response team. So I just call them and see if they're interested in services and connect them to victim witness or other agencies as needed / wanted.
That's to continue getting more services other than what you could help them.
Yeah,
right?
So like we refer them to like victim witness. It's the biggest one, or like, you know, a lot of them are oftentimes, unfortunately, survivors of sexual assault are not always ready for services. Mm-hmm. It takes them a while. So, and that's understandable too. But we do connect them to victim witness, or they also get services through us. Yeah, so it varies.
Okay, what would you say is the best or worst thing about your job?
The best thing, honestly, is working for my clients. That and the people that I work with. So I have a huge passion. I've always wanted to work for women. I know that survivors can be men and women, but like I consider myself a feminist. So like just the experiences that I've gone through growing up and being in a position now where I can kind of, you know, support women that have been in a position that my mom has been in, that I have been in, unfortunately, it's it's just helping them because I know what that feels like on both sides, you know, growing up with it and then being in that relationship. So that's the best part, that I can like really be there to support them, build that relationship, build that rapport with my clients. Likewise, the staff that I work with, they're all great people. They're all wonderful. We have a really good relationship. And the fact that I can go to them whenever I need anything, either professionally at work or personally, it's amazing too. The worst part is hearing the stories. There's times where I feel like I don't know what to say, I don't know what to do, I feel lost. And I know there's like only so much I can do, and there's only so much that the agency can do as a whole. So like I need to make sure that I have those boundaries between me and my agency, because I know that you can't save everyone. You can't do that. And at the same time, if you do it for them, it won't be empowering because they have to do it for themselves. And realizing that sometimes people won't be able to save themselves, help themselves either, and understanding like, okay, that's you do what you can do and forgive yourself for what you can't do and move forward.
Do you know of any women that have quit their jobs in order to take care of their families?
Not in this position, not working here, but at other places, yes.
Okay, like what are some challenges that women face trying to become independent, to become the head of the household, like that you see women facing right now?
Yeah, I've seen, well, I know that, for example, where I used to work at, another place that I used to work at, they did have to kind of take a leave or like quit temporarily because they were recent mothers, or they didn't have anyone to take care of their child. So they just had to like completely stop working and take care of their child. And also, I think she had to take care of her mom too. So that was really hard for her, and because she didn't want to leave the agency. And what I love about where I work now is the fact that I think because almost all of us are all women for like in all offices, so we understand, and we work with a lot of women. We understand that, you know, it's not easy to be a mom. It's not easy because a mom doesn't stop. That's a job that goes on 24/7. It doesn't stop. So they're very flexible and they're very understanding, like, okay, if you need to go home, if you need to pick up your child from school, go pick him up. If you don't have daycare, you need to bring him into the office for the day, okay, that's fine too. If you need to work from home because they're sick, work from home. So they're very flexible and understanding because of that. Even like going to the bathroom, you will see like pads, you will see like diapers, you would see all of that, because it's so welcoming in that sense. And I haven't had that in other jobs or like heard of other people where they have that.
Before we jump into this podcast, I do want to give a little bit of a trigger warning, as we will be discussing topics like sexual harassment for a short period of time during our stream. If you feel as though you might be triggered by this topic, you are welcome to fast forward or skip to.
How often do women in the Monarch service and report sexual harassment? Like, how often do men come in and say they've experienced a sexual harassment or from women?
From like clients or like
Clients. Yeah.
Well, a lot of the sexual assault unfortunately is from, well, people that causes harm. A lot of times it's people that they work with. But like, for example, when the sexual assaults that I've read, it's just, there's a sexual assault, a safe exam almost anywhere from like 2 to 3 a week. And those stories, like, you do see like they make like, I can't really share. I'm not really sure. I'm not saying names, ni nada. But like, you will see that, you know, they'll try to like pressure them into having sex, or they'll like get the other person drunk, or they'll, you know, force them down. They'll try and say things of like that kind of not instigate it, but like, you know, pressure. When you read those stories, the part that sucks the most is that, because not all of them, but when there is intoxication, they don't remember a lot of it, or some of them do get drugged, so you don't really know exactly like when that happens. Sexual harassment, specifically in the workplace, because, you know, not to say that sexual harassment cannot happen between women, but it is like a predominantly women environment where I work at. And then, so there's not a lot of like, that I've heard of like sexual harassment disputes with HR to my knowledge. But even so, like the relationships that we have together, it's really close and united that I feel like we would feel comfortable talking to each other as well, and like saying like, hey, that didn't make me feel comfortable. And I also feel like you have the support to like go to HR and talk to them if needed.
Okay, so you do those recommendations to them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, staff or like whomever, like, you know, you should definitely talk to HR.
Okay, and how do you, I don't know if you answered this, but how does sexual harassment affect women physically and mentally, like, with the stories that you hear? I know you can't share much, but, like, how do you think that affects them?
Well, I know that some of my cases that are not sexual assault, like they do experience like domestic violence, but they'll talk about like where they've worked at, that it does make them uncomfortable, that they don't want to go into work. I remember that I used to work at a kitchen area, and I was I was I was pretty young. I was like in my early 20s. And a lot of the men that worked there would be in like their early 40s. So they would kind of like talk to you in a kind of way that, like, now looking back, it kind of felt like it was a lot of grooming. Um, and then I remember I was talking to one of my coworkers, and she told me that someone that was working there basically like kind of like insinuated that he wanted to pay her to have sex with him, because he was like complaining about like how he wasn't having sex with his wife, and they were having marital issues and this and that. So like the fact that this 40-year-old was complaining about, he was first have complaining about like marital issues, then goes into like not having sex to like this young 20-year-old, like that's not okay. Especially because like there was a lot of rumors that this girl was having a sexual relationship with one of the coworkers there who was like twice her age. So like that kind of spread. So like, you know, even though that didn't happen to me directly, you know, it made her uncomfortable. And now it's like, oh, now I know about it. And it's like, oh, I need to be careful with this person now. And I need to be mindful about what they say and be more hyper vigilant. The women coworkers were all, for the most, the students specifically were all pretty close. You know, you kind of develop your relationships there, but like with the older men, that's where it kind of like te ocupas cuidar un poquito más. And then it kind of made me think about like this older person that she was in a sexual relationship with. I kind of started thinking back, like, it made me think back about like, okay, how is he talking to me then? How is he talking to me? And it started to make me feel more comfortable and kind of detach myself more from him, because he is a very friendly character. He is very like approachable y todo eso. But then it's like, you start to think like, oh, are you being friendly? Like, are you genuinely being friendly, or like, are you trying to get at something, you know? And it made me feel bad for her, because, you know, being in your early 20s, you're in college, you're away from home, you're young, you know, you have so many things going on. And if this person treats you good, et cetera, like you do become groomed into like doing these things. So that environment was not healthy in that way. And I don't know how many of the staff knew that. I don't know how many of them like were aware of these things going on or not, because I would only talk about it with my friends working there.
Or how many women had to go and experience that.
Yeah, and not say anything. Or like if they did say something, like, you know, I don't know, because, and that's the part that sucks, you know, about like sexual assault, harassment, etc., is that you do get kind of scared, because you don't know, like, if, especially like for example me, like you don't know this is with her having that sexual relationship with him, like it's okay that I don't want to spread her personal business. And at the same time, like, I don't know if it is consensual, but at the same time, like, is it? Was she groomed into it? Now looking back. But at the same time, like what she shared with me, I don't know if she shared that with a manager or not. I really, to this day, I really don't know. And survivors that go through that, they oftentimes don't report it because they're scared or they feel guilty. They feel bad for this other person. And
you mentioned the story about your coworker that you go back and think, oh, maybe he was trying to do that. But then you put a stop. So then he was like, I'm not going to pass that.
Con ella, conmigo.
With you.
Well, with me, he would just like, I just looked back and I was thinking like, you know, we were having a really close relationship. Y luego like he would get really close, etc. But for me, it was like, oh, we were just working together. We're being friendly. Like in my head, there was no malice, ill intent, or like nothing of that sort, right? We were just coworkers working together. But after she told me that, it just made me think like, okay, maybe I need to take a step back and be aware of like, where am I exactly? How old am I? How old is this person? Like just look at the big picture.
That could maybe happen to you.
Yeah. You know, like, you know, what if he ever offered to like do anything? I don't think he ever did. I don't remember. But like at the same time, it made me take a step back into our friendship, you know?
Yeah, because you didn't want that to happen for him to get to that point. But I think he was aware that you were aware. What was he heading towards? Because your friend had just told you, or you had just experienced that story with your friend. So you're like, wait, like this sounds like the same scenario. So I should just put like a stop.
Yeah, and after she told me that, it just made me be more mindful about how I talk to like other male co-workers, older men at that place. Yeah, and it sucks because like I know that not all men are like that, but then it's a reminder of like your vulnerability as a woman, as a young woman, as a young college woman who's far away from home.
Yeah, that would take me to the next question, which is, what is some advice that you would give a woman facing gender discrimination in the workplace? But I think you mentioned it by what you told your friend or you did. So what did you do in that situation to kind of make it stop?
I think it was more like me. I had to like take initiative and not continue that relationship in any way, shape, or form, or set more boundaries, or be like more cold toward the other person. Like instead of being friendly and like joking around, I kind of take a step back and be more professional with the other person.
More serious,
yeah.
Okay.
But honestly, I think that if things do get like that people should talk to a manager about it. If you don't feel safe about doing that, go with a friend, go with someone that makes you feel safe and comfortable. Or you can also call anonymously and like to the manager and be like, hey, like I work here, this is what's going on. I don't want to say my name, but like this happened to me. Because nothing sucks more than being in a toxic work environment, especially in like, if that's going on, that's not okay. I mean, ideally, if HR is good, they're supposed to mean that anonymous. I hope that things like that, because they will have to talk to the other person, but I don't think they would put the two of them in the same room, because there has to be some form of like it being anonymous to protect the survivor. So if that ever does happen, I would be very concerned and I would have some questions if like both people were in the same room, because the fact that someone who is like impotent, like has this experience and are vulnerable, and you're gonna put them in the same room with the person who's like causing harm to them and talk, that's not okay.
Yeah, that doesn't sound right.
Yeah, but I don't think they'll do that. I don't know.
So how you deal with men or the separation in the workplace?
Well, I think after that experience, like that was back when I was in college, so it just made me, it set better boundaries with me and like how I talk to, especially when there's like such a huge age gap. Like I was 20 and they were like in their 40s. It made me be more aware of that. And at the same time, like if I ever do meet someone who's like in college, just like talk to them and be like, hey, just, be careful, because you are unfortunately vulnerable, and not just in a college setting, just like in any setting.
Yeah.
And it sucks that like we have to do that as women, but we also just, looking at statistics, looking at reports, looking at everything, the numbers are there.
I think you mentioned this one, but do you believe that there have been some positive changes that are working towards eliminating gender inequality in the workplace? And that was like,
Yeah, I've also been hearing that, well, a lot of jobs, especially here, I think in the Santa Cruz area, I don't know about other places, but I think there's a big push for that. There's a lot of departments of equity and inclusion where they're supposed to talk about this, and a lot of jobs always do training on like sexual harassment. It's always a mandatory, so it's good to have those trainings, because the reason why those trainings are important is because they hold everyone accountable, and you can't say like, oh, I didn't know, I couldn't do that. It's like, no, you took this training.
So last question, what changes do you hope happen in the next couple of years in regarding to gender equality? Why do you think that discussion about the pay gap is important?
Yeah, the pay gap is important because I really don't understand why men get paid more. I don't understand it. I also wish to see more women CEOs. Like, I want to find more women-led companies, especially women of color. I would like to see more, rights and more work benefits in regards to like when a woman gets pregnant and needs to take care of her child. I think they only give you like 3 or 6 months. It would be better if you get like 9 months, or like 10 months would be amazing, or even 7 months. I really don't know what the time frame is.
So you said that you haven't experienced any gender pay yourself.
Yeah, and I will be transparent. I think that I really encourage people to talk about how much they get paid at work, because it shouldn't be a taboo. Often companies or agencies will say like, don't talk about it. No, they don't want you to talk about it because they don't want you to know the discrepancies between the pay amongst each other. In reality, you should be talking about the pay again if you feel comfortable with it, because that's when you get to see like, why are they getting paid more than me? Like, that's where you start to see the inequality. So in general, you should always be talking about pay.
Okay, well, I want to thank you for being here and being like for our team and for our listeners, and thank you for your time.
Of course.
Well, thank you, Janet and Veronica, for the in-depth discussion of today's topic. We'd like to end our podcast today by saying that this is really a broad social issue that needs to be addressed and brought to people's attention. In today's episode, Janet and Veronica discussed many important things, and we hope you have some valid takeaways from today's episode. Speaking of which, thanks to our team and listeners. Hope you all have a great day.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for looking at issues of safety and women in the workplace. That was really informative. Let me try to turn the light back on in my office. Hold on 1 second. Okay, that's better. So let's go to our next group. The Right to Read. Could somebody introduce our podcast?
Yes, I'm glad to do that. Thank you. My name is Heather Wishlow, and my teammates Michael Martinez, Vanessa Treadwell, and Christian Zagel present the podcast, The Right to Read. In this first episode, we interviewed Miss Lessa Kanaya Opa Palayo Lazada, the president of the American Library Association, and she talks about the rapid escalation of book bans during the 2021 and 2022 year. She shares with us what the ALA and other organizations are doing to fight for the freedom to read. And you can also check out a presentation link at the bottom to learn more about the specifics books being banned and how you can support the Unite Against Book Ban, a national initiative that empowers readers everywhere to stand together in the fight against censorship.
Thank you. Okay, I'll pull up our podcast.
Hello, and welcome to The Right to Read. I'm Christian Segal. I'm here with my co-host Vanessa Treadwell. Today we'll be discussing the recent surge of book bans in the United States during 2021 through 2022. An unprecedented number of book bans were intact at schools and libraries across the United States and affected over 5,000 schools and 4 million students. These book bans have taken away the books that relate to individuals' experiences and their lives, and hurts the community that the schools and libraries serve. We hope that by discussing this topic, listeners will understand the importance of diverse literature and join in the fight against censorship and support the freedom to read. The American Library Association is a non-profit organization based in the United States that promotes libraries and library education internationally. This 150-year-old organization ensures access to information for 50,000 members worldwide. They also offer space where equality, diversity, and inclusion can intersect with social justice and intellectual freedom. The ALA sponsors Book Ban Week, an event where literature and libraries communities raise awareness about this challenge, books, and the First Amendment freedom. Miss Lessa Kananiapua Halaya Lozada is the president of the American Library Association, chair of the executive board, and chair of the council. She shares with us about the rapid escalation of book bans and what the ALA is doing to fight for the freedom to read.
What we're facing right now is the highest number of book challenges that we have ever tracked in the 20-year history of our Office for Intellectual Freedom. So in 2021, we tracked 729 challenges to library, school, and university materials, which resulted in more than 1,597 individual book challenges or removals. This year alone, from January to August of 2022, we've tracked 681 challenges, which has resulted in 1,651 individual book challenges or removals. So we have already surpassed the number from last year. And where that intersection comes in with social justice is that the books that are being banned at the highest rates typically feature LGBTQ+ authors and or main characters or information about that community, or they are also targeting books by and about Brown and Indigenous people of color, as well as the histories that we share within those communities.
The United States is more multiracial and ethnically diverse than previous generations. Federal statistics show that since 2014, children of color have comprised nearly 55% of the total public school K-12 student body and mirror the rapidly changing demographics of the country. There have been increased efforts to promote racial and ethnic inclusion, social equality, and offer an understanding of the contributions of all people who have shaped our country's history. Intellectual and social movements like critical race theory address how the social concepts of race and ethnicity have embedded racism in laws, institutions, the media, and social political movements in America. Yet efforts to promote an understanding have been met with partisan politics and a culture war. Sexuality, sexual preference, and gender are also topics more openly discussed and accepted now. Children and young adults naturally experience human sexual development. They have a right to learn about healthy sexuality, how to create boundaries, and gain an understanding and respect of the different forms of relationships that exist in the world they live in. For example, the 22 Gallup poll reports that 1 in 5 individuals who are Generation Z and 1 in 10 millennials now identify as LGBTQ. Education serves a primary role in developing an understanding and respect for the diversity of America. Yet, the current book bans and resulting legislation are primarily based on conservative ideals of Americanism, Christianity, and heterosexuality, and do not reflect the country's racial or social makeup.
You know, I think that we are seeing an environment that is becoming increasingly politicized. And I think that, you know, because libraries are that place, you know, for inclusion, that we become targets for that. I think that we are seen as kind of easy targets for folks to promote their own political agendas and for folks to promote their own ideologies and to use us to create the worlds that they think that they want.
One of the biggest argument advocates have to support book bans is that they want to protect our children from ideals or values that are not in alignment with their family morals and values. That it should be up to parents to decide what books their children can access, and that they are trying to protect children from the content they are not ready to confront.
Every family absolutely has the right to determine what is right for their family. to read and participate in, but what they don't have the right to is to make that choice for other people's families. And so what the library is there to do is to be able to be the space so that all families can see themselves and have access to that information. And one of the arguments also is that access to books or access to these ideas will inherently change the family structure. It'll inherently change the values that they share. But what really we are encouraging and what we need folks to understand is that just having access to idea doesn't automatically change your mind about anything. I think that we have seen that in the age of misinformation that we are living in, that it takes so much more to change ideologies and to change perspectives, but also that, like I said, children's minds aren't automatically changed, but one of the repercussions is also that children also won't have an understanding of all of the different lives that are being lived in the world, and that just because they don't believe in something doesn't mean that they can't respect the humanity of another person that they may come across that lives their life in a different way or comes from a different background and has had different life experiences.
PEN America is a national nonprofit group that advocates for free expression in literature, and they say that there are 4 major self-described conservative parents' rights organizations that have 300 or more local or regional chapters. These are the groups that are most active in promoting book bans. These national groups include Moms for Liberty, U.S. Parents Involved in Education, No Left Turn in Education, and Parents' Rights in Education. PEN estimates that 73% of these groups formed in 2021 have been instrumental in at least 50% of the book bans being enacted across the country during the 2021-2022 school year. The groups use a playbook of strategies, including disseminating lists of books they believe should be banned in their communities and mobilizing members to converge on school board meetings to argue on whether various books are appropriate for school children and young adults. They have demanded libraries adhere to new rating systems and use inflammatory language to imply that grooming and pornography are occurring within the books. There have also been numerous reports of harassment and intimidation by these group members.
So at the beginning of 2022, the American Library Association conducted a bipartisan poll that found that 71% of voters across party lines were opposed to efforts to remove books from public libraries. And it was including majorities of voters, like I said, across party lines. So we're talking about, just over 25% of voters are actually in favor of this type of behavior. So we're really looking at a small minority of individuals that are trying to silence diverse voices as well as diverse ideas and stop access to information. Typically, the book bans that we're seeing are organized efforts by groups that are just providing lists of materials to challenge or providing their own kind of slant on things. And so some of the challenges that are coming, the individuals have never even actually read the book that they are challenging or attended the program that they're challenging. And one of the interesting things, and interesting in the awful sense that we've seen over the last 18 months or so, is that it used to be a one-to-one challenge. So it would be one challenge for one book or one challenge for one program. And now what we're seeing is one challenge now hosts 2, 3, sometimes over 100 different titles of books that may not even be in the library.
According to John Skolnick, who wrote the article, "What's behind the right-wing book ban frenzy? Big money and long-term plan." Organizers on the front lines of the parental right movements have connections to the right-wing Republican politics and donors that are highly skilled at astroturfing local conflicts on the national scale. These advocates provide playbooks on the process to get book bans, draft model laws, lobby legislators, provide legal support, and recruit parents and community activists. A slide for one of these events claimed that globalism, utopians, socialists, totalitarians, and the UN are using public schools to undermine freedom and Christianity. Additional support and financial resources are also being sponsored by organizations like the Heritage Foundation, an American influential think tank, Washington, D.C., known for the controversial activism.
Book bans are just the beginning. Numerous states have passed or are in process of passing legislation to support a wider censorship effort. Largely, it is Republican states that have instituted the largest number of book bans and also passed the most restrictive legislation and policies. These restrictions affect how public school teachers can talk about race, gender, and sexuality. Teachers and school staff can expect to experience harsh penalties if they don't adhere.
Yeah, I think that there are lots of different bills and legislation that are popping up. You know, like Missouri is one. Oklahoma also has a law on the books that does not allow schools to put forth, you know, kind of objectionable materials. One of the Oklahoma state librarians gave the QR code to Brooklyn Public Library to her students because she couldn't provide access to what some of us would consider formative books in high school.
Efforts to expand the book bans have also begun to spread out to public libraries and could affect readers of all ages. In Missouri, Secretary of State Jay Ashcroft, a likely candidate for the Republican governor in 2024, is leading the effort to ban certain books in his state public libraries. Mr. Ashcroft submits a proposal to rule change that establish a certificate requirement for libraries to receive state fund. Under the plan, they would need to adopt policies to determine what material is appropriate for certain ages. He claims the measures are to protect minors from what he calls non-age appropriate materials. And state money will not be used to purchase or acquire inappropriate materials that appeal to the prurient interests of a minor. If this legislation goes through, it has the potential to limit what readers of all ages have access to.
This legislation comes after school librarians across Missouri were required to pull books from the shelves or face the potential of criminal charges under a new state law banning explicit sexual material that passed in August of 2022. The law defines explicit sexual material as any visual depiction of sex acts or genitalia, with some exceptions for artistic or scientific significance. It applies to any type of image, including pictorial, three-dimensional, or visual depictions, and includes photography, film, video, picture, or computer-generated images. It also includes images in books or magazines in a library and images on internet sites that students are directed to. Violations of the law by school employees who provide such materials to students are considered a Class A misdemeanor and carry a maximum penalty of 1 year in jail and a fine of $2,000.
And so the concerns are when we are talking about funding, especially, is that if you're defunding libraries, you're not only now silencing voices, you're silencing ideas, you're also taking away a third community space that is vital and essential to the community. It is one of the only third spaces. You know, you have home, you have work/school, and then you have the library as a free space to be able to come together as a community and to be able to share with one another and build the bonds that are essential, I think, to having a democratic society and to having a full and healthy society, that one in which all of your community members can feel seen.
Many states are banning books about race because they say they are teaching students about critical race theory. The theory acknowledges that racial disparities exist. White privilege have persisted in the U.S. history and has been reinforced by U.S. laws and institutions. Although already taught at colleges and law school levels, suppressing books about racial-based historical bent schools cannot change the past, and it impels collective efforts to reconcile and move forward and not repeat racist ideological thinking in the future.
Tennessee is just one example among many states that illustrates how book bans and legislation are being implemented, not based on historical accuracy, but personal preference. A group of parents led by a local chapter of Moms for Liberty attempted to get dozens of books removed, including a picture book called Ruby Bridges Goes to School, written by and about Ruby Bridges. Ruby Bridges was the first Black child to attend an all-white elementary school in 1960 in New Orleans after desegregation. Parents complained that this book mentions a large crowd of angry white people who didn't want Black children in a white school, and that the book doesn't offer redemption at the end.
Additionally, the group objected to educators using words like injustice, unequal, inequality, protest, march, and segregation in their grammar lessons. Other books that have historical portraits and are being banned across the United States, including Martin Luther King Jr. and the March to Washington, because there were photographs of political violence. Another book is Arthur Spiegelman Pulitzer Prize-winning graphic novel Mouse, where the author interviews his father about his experience as a Polish Jew and a Holocaust survivor. Parents groups want this book removed, saying that the memoir was inappropriate for students. These groups have put librarians at the forefront of what's being seen as a political fight.
And so the repercussions of this also are on very tangible levels, where our library workers are afraid of being fined. They are afraid of losing their jobs. They are afraid of being jailed, and they don't know what is going to happen because these laws also are not clear on what materials are and are not okay. And the ones that are very clear, we don't agree with, right? So it's a very difficult and challenging time for library workers right now. And at the American Library Association, we're trying to provide as much support as we can to folks who are facing these challenges on the front line.
Gag orders are state legislative efforts that enforce restrictions on teaching about topics such as race, gender, American history, and LGBTQ+ identities in K-12 and higher education. PEN America tracks legislation regarding proposed educational gag orders, and this year there has been a 250% increase compared to 2021. The book ban is inexplicably linked to legislation that attempts to suppress teachings about racism, sexism, or bias. For example, in 2022, Republican Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed the controversial Parental Rights in Education bill that prevents public school teachers from offering instruction about sexual orientation or gender identity in their class.
School districts throughout Florida are now required to provide parents with complete information about all health services, library materials, and sex education, and any other program a child utilizes. The legislation also allows parents to challenge any book or instruction material they find offensive. The bill, known as Don't Say Gay, applies to students in kindergarten through 3rd grade, or in any manner that is age appropriate or development appropriate for students in accordance with state standards. The bill is concerning as well as multiple repercussions. Additionally, in October 2022, Republicans introduced a measure to Congress to attempt to pass a national Don't Say Gay law that will prohibit any federal funds from being spent to teach children under 10 about the LGBTQ issues. As we approach the presidential elections in 2024, book bans and supporting legislation are becoming a partisan issue, and many candidates are taking steps to support the freedom to read.
Absolutely. So one of the most important things right now, because folks are using this, in their campaigns already, as we're looking towards Senate and congressional races, and this is a wedge issue for many folks. So as we are approaching, our current election and the future one, on the Unite Against Book Bans website, we have a questionnaire where we can ask our local candidates to complete and give their pledge to sign on and promise their commitment to the freedom to read. This questionnaire and this commitment, I think, is a sign and will be a sign of who shares our values of freedom of speech and the freedom to read. And I've even seen some state library associations ask these questions in candidate debates and share those results on social media. Of course, as public institutions and as nonprofits, we can't do too much lobbying or, take political sides, but what we can do is share information out, as well as our national partners to personalize and send to local newspapers, websites, and magazines that are popular in the community. If they can either respond to a related article or a column recently published in that outlet, or reference local events or activities that have been happening, like a specific book ban at a public library or school in the community, or comments made by a public official, or personal appeals, sharing a personal story that will resonate with readers and others out there.
The ALA is also supportive of libraries experiencing issues from the book bans.
We have one-on-one consultations with library workers who are experiencing book bans, so we can help to point them towards legal resources, financial resources, political resources. We, of course, also have our Unite Against Book Bans campaign, which is for the broader community to be able to help, that has a toolkit for some of the things that we've discussed already. And we also have something called the Merit Fund. And so the Merit Fund supports library workers and individuals who may be experiencing financial hardship because of book banning and book censorship. Of course, as we've discussed, individuals and readers everywhere to stand with us together in the fight against censorship so that we can empower individuals also to use their voice in the public arena to stop efforts to ban books. I think that one of the greatest strengths that we have is that we are in a democracy. And one of the greatest strengths of that democracy is the ability for folks to make change by using their voice and to make change by coming up with creative ways to express their voices and to create awareness and promotion. So I think college students in particular are in a really great position to be able to support the freedom to read because you have access to libraries right on your campus. And your campus needs to know, also your deans and presidents need to know how much you value the work of the library workers on your campus and how that information, access to that information has impacted you.
ALA and their many partners in PEN America and other organizations are doing what they can to stop the growing number of book bans. Members of Congress have stepped up to aid their efforts. Congressman Jamie Raskin, who chairs the House, oversees the subcommittee on civil rights and libraries called the Wave of Book Bans, a direct attack on First Amendment rights and which should alarm every American who believes that freedom of expression is a fundamental pillar of our democracy. In September 2022, Democratic lawmakers in the U.S. House of Representatives and Senate introduced different policies in an attempt to stop the aggressive book ban campaign. It is endorsed by the American Federal Teacher and National Educational Association, labor unions, as well as the literature and educational interest groups, and they all call upon local governments to protect the right of students to learn.
To find out more information about how you can support the American Library Association's Unite Against Book Ban, check out the website in the link below. This is Vanessa Treadwell with my co-host Christian Zagal. We want to thank you for listening to this edition of The Right to Read. We would also like to thank Michael Martinez and Heather Wishlow, who wrote the script and assisted in curating and producing this podcast. We invite you to listen to part 2 of this podcast, where we explore the history of book bans in America, talk with a local Monterey author who had her book banned, and learn about ways that you can support the right to read.
Thank you. Really excellent work. And, congratulations on getting such a high profile narrator to interview. So great work as a team. Okay. And then I scrolled down there. There are some links that the podcast was referring to, some other resources, and then we'll put up the second episode later. Okay. So let's go on to our next podcast. Maybe this will work. Okay, could our group introduce the LGBTQ plus policies podcast?
Hi, my name is Anelu Rodriguez, and I worked with Azul Melendres, and we chose to research LGBTQ policies because it's a topic that's really relevant in current events right now, and I think it's very important for us to know as much as we can about the topic before we use our vote. So hopefully this helps inform you guys a little bit about that.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, I am Anilu Rodriguez.
And my name is Azul Garcia Melendres.
We're going to be discussing LGBTQ plus policies in the United States and how they impact the community. We decided to research LGBTQ plus policies because while this movement has been making major social advancements, many policies in the U.S. still infringe upon the community's rights. We as college students need to be aware of these issues to have an informed opinion. About 66% of students vote, and if they know about the LGBTQ plus policies and how they impact their community, we may be able to affect their lives in a positive way.
Why do you think it's important for the public to be aware of the aforementioned areas or issues?
Well, that's a great question. I think there are a number of probably a number of reasons. I'll start with the one that's closest to my heart, I think, is working with students. You know, for many years, students, high school, middle school, high school, all ages, college, just were not aware of this history. And I remember one time I taught one of the very first times I taught an LGBTQ history course at CSU Monterey Bay. I had a student who came up to me one day after we had talked about Harvey Milk and his assassination in San Francisco in 1978, you know, early political leader of the 70s. And he came up to me and said, "I'm from San Francisco and I've never heard of Harvey Milk." And I was very shocked that someone who had grown up in that city, which is a very queer-friendly space, was unaware of this history. And it just reminded me of how important it is for folks to really understand the depth of these issues especially for students, because students really deserve, and they are smart enough to know that they can understand the complexity of history. It's not simple. History is never simple, and to be able to look at these histories from multiple perspectives really makes them better whatever they're going to do in the world. It doesn't really matter. It gives you a sense of context. It gives you a sense of appreciation for the diversity of the human experience in the United States, particularly, which is what I teach, but even globally, to understand that sexual orientations have histories, that these communities have existed for a long time and have faced a lot of struggles, but also have achieved an awful lot politically and many other ways. So I think it's important for students. So I'll say that first. Secondly, I think it's important for the general public, or especially elected officials, who legislate on these issues regularly, and without the knowledge of the history, or having a one-sided view of that history, would really prevent you from being a good policymaker.
The LGBTQ plus community has a tragic history of persecution by the church, state, and medical community that has expanded over centuries. The United States has been persecuting non-heteronormative actions since the first reported case in 1624. In spite of the intense oppression, the LGBTQ plus community has never ceased to exist, and their presence has grown stronger. We'd like to take the time to mention a couple significant milestones in the history of the LGBTQ plus community that have pushed the movement forward, including Kinsey's study of sexuality in 1948. He led the research of a scientific contribution that shocked the nation when he claimed 50% of men and 28% of women experience homosexual tendencies. This was a breakthrough because it exposed sexuality as a spectrum and validated it as an area of study. Another significant milestone happened in 1959, 10 years before the famous Stonewall riots. The Cooper Donuts riots protested the LAPD's harassment of the gay and transgender patrons of the clubs near the shop. This case of civil disobedience was the first of many protesting police brutality against the LGBTQ plus community. Homosexual activity wasn't decriminalized until the 1970s, and sodomy laws weren't decriminalized nationwide until 2003. With the rise of human rights advocacy and the dissemination of knowledge in the 20th century, awareness of ideas separate from the accepted heteronormative standpoint have increased. However, it is important to note that even when an LGBTQ plus friendly policy is successfully passed, it does not guarantee it will be applied.
It's always so interesting and mind-boggling at the same time that it took the United States so long to finally reach to the point where, a lot of members in the LGBTQ plus community can feel safe to marry their partner.
Yeah, it's interesting how, I guess as a historian, I think maybe in a longer frame, but I do hear what you're saying. Like, for example, it's surprising to some students when we talk about this in class, that it wasn't until the 1970s that same-sex sexuality was decriminalized, actually decriminalized. Before the 1970s, it was, you could have been arrested for certain acts under state law. And it really took all the way until the Lawrence case to decriminalize, to get sort of constitutional sanction to that. So, I mean, it is relatively recent. And this movement, in comparison to other movements, might seem short, but it's actually rather long, and it's taken a long time to reach some of these victories, like any social movement.
The topics that we will be covering today are the policies of California and different states. That is something that we talked about with Professor Ricard, the difference between living here in California and the difference between living in different states such as Florida or Texas, especially in Florida with the Don't Say Gay bill. And for those that don't know, the Don't Say Gay bill, which was originally called the Parental Rights in Education, but dubbed the Don't Say Gay bill, was signed by Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis on March 28th, 2022. It forbids the instruction of sexual orientation and gender identity in kindergarten through third grade. The bill was sponsored by other Republicans who also agreed that parents should be the ones teaching their children about sexual orientation and gender identity. There are similar bills that came out of it, and only one that I really got to cover with Dr. Reichard was about Arkansas, which recently banned gender affirming care for trans youth back in 2021, and currently has a lawsuit against it by the ACLU, which is supported by activists and young members of the transgender community. And we also covered the effects of anti-LGBTQ plus policies. We kind of went over this with the epicenter. It was kind of vague, but mainly just their resources and what they do for the community, for the public, for those that need help. And they have a lot of great resources for anybody that is in need, as well as anybody that wants to do volunteer work or they want to do community service. They have those resources as well, so that they can be in touch with the community.
My name is Dave Reichard. I'm a professor at Cal State Monterey Bay. My research in LGBTQ history has been focused mostly on the late 20th century social movements. And I am particularly interested in how college students have organized on campus starting in the late 1960s through the 1970s. I have a book project that's focusing on that. That's one big area of my research. I'm also very interested in documenting local LGBTQ history. And several years ago, I started working with Rainbow Speakers and Friends, which is a local speakers bureau where you can visit organizations and have panels and discussions to sort of document local LGBTQ history in Monterey County. And that project started as sort of an archival, let's collect some materials, and then quickly morphed into an oral history project as well, where Kristen LaFollette from CSUMB also has been working with her students in an oral history course to document local LGBTQ history. So we've been collaborating on that. And the archive now lives in the library at CSU Monterey Bay and is available for research. So anyone who's interested can consult it. It's a little limited because we've just been collecting the last couple of years, but it is a really good project. So that's mostly my areas of interest for those two, local and the history of student organizing.
The Epicenter is a nonprofit youth drop-in resource center. And one of our focuses is on LGBTQ plus youth in particular. So I am the coordinator of that program. It's called Our Gente. And our main focus is to create safe spaces or brave spaces for LGBTQ plus youth to feel included, to feel safe, to feel like they can be their authentic selves without worrying about how that might be taken or sort of utilized by other people or anything like that. Just sort of like creating spaces where people can be themselves, even whether or not they're part of the LGBTQ plus community, but focusing on that and sort of building networks of support for LGBTQ plus youth, because some of them don't really have space to do that at school or at home or in their social circles that they have available to them.
Our first interview is with Dr. Ricard. We discussed about the policies here in California and around the country about LGBTQ plus rights, but we discussed about the beginnings of the social movement here in California, especially in San Francisco and LA. And it was a very interesting conversation. We had a lot to discuss about. It was a very interesting conversation. We had a lot to discuss about. There's just a lot of history regarding gay rights in LGBTQ plus community. And Dr. Ricard is actually in the process of writing a book. He's actually in the end stages of his book.
The book is called Here Are My People, LGBT College Student Organizing in California, 1967 to 1979. And the book essentially tells the story of the first generation of LGBT students who come out on college campuses in the late 60s and 1970s. And it's primarily a book about folks who identified as gay or lesbian, some bisexual students. The term queer was not common until the 90s. So I'm trying to understand how they create a space on campus, what they do to try to transform campus spaces, and how they work with community to try to organize around the movement issues of the period. And so the chapters explore how they form student organizations, how they try to promote curriculum reform, how they organize events, how they promote queer creativity, how they work together across campuses, because California is very unique in the sense that there are these different systems, the Cal State, the UC, and then community colleges, and then private universities. Mm-hmm. And so students migrated around those systems a lot. They still do. But I try to trace how they work together as queer students across different campuses. And then how they engage various movements, from women's liberation to gay liberation to the gay and lesbian movement of the 70s primarily. And it sort of just looks at how they go about doing that and how they shape the movement in California. It's a project that, again, was inspired by my work with students here at CSUMB. And I just began asking, how have these kind of groups come about? I had no idea. Mm-hmm. And that got me started. And so I started researching it and realized that there hadn't been anything really written about it, very, very little written about it in California. And even nationally, when I started the project, there was very little. It's changing. There's more scholars working on this around the country, but So it's hopefully in 2023. I'm at the stage now where I'm just finishing up some edits, and then it has to be copy edited and then all that stuff. But it's getting close. It's under contract with the University of Georgia Press, and so hopefully we'll see it in 2023.
I thought the interview was really interesting. I learned a lot of things that I haven't heard of before. Something that he said that really stuck out to me is that like anything good that has come out of the movement is a product of struggle. So the fact that CSUMB now has more accessible bathrooms, that it took someone to say that that was what the students needed in order to get that. So that was kind of like a reminder to, I guess, continue to speak up when you know that there's something that can be different. The good thing is that CSUMB is a very inclusive school. So this is like the perfect space for us to practice doing that, practice speaking up and taking notice when something is wrong, because it's one of the more welcoming environments, because our professors are encouraging this all around. So that was one of the things he said that really stuck with me.
And it was also fascinating to hear from a historian that gay rights is something that has been fought for so long. Even in secret, he and I discussed how seniors also weren't able to come out during their time, during their youth.
Coming out is a long process. I always think it's a lifetime process. It's not. It's not something that stops. I'm always coming out. All the time. Just a quick example. The other day, I was in my gym, and there's people that and say hello to, and someone came up to me and said, "Hey, I saw you, and it looked like your twin. Do you have a brother?" And I looked, I said, "That was my husband." So, and I had you never know how people are going to react to such a statement, but this happens often, where you have to make a decision in a moment where you come out. And, queer people have to do this all the time. Some people can be make the choice and be safe. And I always advocate for safe, be safe. But sometimes you have to take a risk, and you have to come out in a context that you might not know what's going to happen. So it's a lifelong thing, even as we age. And it's an issue, for example, for seniors, to kind of jump ahead a couple of generations, where when folks end up say in a retirement home or in a continuing care facility, and they often have to go back in the closet because they don't feel safe coming out in a context where they don't have a partner, or their partner has passed, and so then they have to be silent.
Just learning the history that we don't get taught in school was really important to me, and hopefully important to everybody else, because we're taught very little information about gay rights and the social movement. We barely hear anything about Stonewall. Really get a brief of what Stonewall was. We don't even get taught about the important people in Stonewall. We didn't learn about Martha P. Johnson. She was a great drag queen, who stood up for herself during the riots. There's just so much more history to the social movement that we don't get taught, that I hope it teaches people that are listening to the podcast something. Just a little snippet, even. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was a really great interview overall.
It's nice just to see that there's more representation for their stories, because I'm sure that it helps other people with their own experiences, and also helps people just be more empathetic to other people's experiences, because it's very easy to just shut yourself off and stick to one mindset. It helps fill in the picture to have a better understanding of what other people go through, and hopefully it's enough to influence people to just treat people with more kindness.
We also spoke with Epicenter, a local organization here in Salinas that is geared towards empowering at-risk youth, especially younger members of the LGBTQ plus community. And I talked with them, and they were very nice and very sweet. And it was very fascinating to hear a local organization that was so close to me, especially if you're in the Monterey County area. They're a great organization. They provide a lot of resources for youth members of the community, but also just anybody that actually needs help.
I never heard about it because I've been living in Salinas since like 2013. So yeah, I never knew that there was a youth group around here. So yeah.
We have like just a lot of different resources for young people, whether it's something that they need for school or job hunting or whatever, or just a place to sort of be themselves, like
Right.
and just because I think like development of like our personhood starts with spaces like this where we're sort of encouraged and allowed to be authentic and also feel supported and encouraged to take that next step or develop skills to whatever that next step becomes, beyond just the idea of having a social network, a social or social support within this network that we built here. We have things like access to free clothing and hygiene products, and also free food. Like we have a food pantry. So if our youth happen to like need groceries at home, like they can take a bag of groceries with them when they leave. Or if they just need something to eat for between now and when they get home or whatever, we have our kitchen stocked with stuff for them to eat.
Our clothing closet.
Yeah, we have the clothing closet and access to computers, access to Wi-Fi, printing, finding a place to print stuff for free. That's like kind of rare too.
Yeah.
So stuff like that. Like you can see behind here, we have like a bunch of books. So like I have like an LGBTQ plus library that I like to, or I allow people to like lend out books, and it's also like in a way that like you're not going to the library and taking this book, if you happen to like not want to be seen checking out a gay book or something like that.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
you're able to do that here, like rather discreetly, I would say. And things like that. It's just creating access to anything that our youth might want or need. That's sort of like the mission, basically, is to do that.
It's actually so nice to hear that there have been parents that go to the Epicenter to ask for advice. They ask for resources on how to help guide their child through this.
Many people are unable to vote or protest due to social, economic, and/or emotional reasons, and this leads them to believe they can't make a meaningful contribution to the movement. Protesting and voting are not the end. Many people are unable to vote or protest due to social, economic, and/or emotional reasons, and this leads them to believe they can't make a meaningful contribution to the movement. Protesting and voting are not the end-all be-all solutions to social injustice. There are many different courses of action to choose from if you are looking to be an ally for the LGBTQ plus movement. Donating to outreach programs like the Trevor Project, thanking your lawmakers for passing legislation, and attending Pride events are all valid and effective ways to build a community that is accepting and loving of all. After all the research and interviews were completed, I felt much more empathy and respect for the LGBTQ plus community. I am grateful for assignments that expand my mindset as a student and as a citizen of my community. Thank you for listening to our podcast.
All right, right. Thank you for those in-depth interviews that you conducted. So great work. Okay, and then our final podcast, please. Could a group member from the Mental Health Advocacy podcast give us a little introduction?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Our podcast was on mental health advocacy. We were able to interview 2 individuals, one whose family member passed away due to suicide, and a master's student who has worked as a social worker. Please pay attention to the trigger warning, though, as we do talk about some emotional topics.
Thank you.
Hello everyone, we are students from California State University, Monterey Bay, and today we are going to dive into the topic of mental illness, the stigma around mental illness, and some of the social organizations that have arisen around this issue. A fair warning though, we will be mentioning some difficult topics such as self-harm, substance abuse, and suicide. The CDC defines mental health as revolving around one's mental, emotional, and psychological well-being. When we delve into mental health, we can definitely see how it has become such a big topic of discussion. But mental health has always been an issue. It's not just a new thing. We see in history with women in the 1800s who had very valid mental health concerns, but their illnesses were attributed to things like hysteria or hormones. We also see cases of people being thought to be possessed by demons, but who were probably suffering from a psychotic break. Lately, we've seen much more activism in regards to this issue. People have come forward and have been really honest about their mental illnesses, and it's becoming less taboo to talk about. There are even celebrities and top athletes coming out to show that they also suffer from mental illness. Last year, Naomi Osaka, an Olympic tennis player, opened up about the depression she has faced. Still, she has faced criticism because of her opening up. Even though it is difficult, having these conversations is key to ending the stigma surrounding these illnesses. The stigma those with mental illness face can be crippling and lead to intense discrimination by both peers and law enforcement. This stigma can prevent individuals with mental illnesses from seeking help and treatment, and can lead to substance abuse and suicide. Stigma is defined as when someone is viewed in a negative way because they have a distinguishing characteristic or personal trait that is thought to be or actually is a disadvantage. Others' judgment almost always stems from a lack of understanding rather than information based on facts. This leads to discrimination, either from health advisors, police officers, family members, or others. Because of this, more than half of people who show symptoms or are diagnosed with mental illness do not receive help for their disorders. They will often avoid or severely delay finding treatment because of their concerns about being treated differently, or because of their fears of losing their livelihood or jobs because of the prejudice they have faced or seen others faced in the past. This stigma and discrimination can worsen symptoms and reduce the likelihood to ever seek treatment. According to the Mayo Clinic, stigma leads to negative effects on recovery among people diagnosed with severe mental illnesses like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. These effects can include reduced hope, lower self-esteem, increased psychiatric symptoms, difficulties with social relationships, reduced likelihood of staying with treatment, and more difficulties at work. And there are 3 types of stigma. These 3 types are public stigma, self-stigma, and institutional stigma. For institutional stigma, we see issues with law enforcement and 5150s. A 5150 is when a person, as a result of a mental health disorder, is a danger to others, or to himself or herself, or gravely disables a peace officer, professional, or person in charge of a facility. And when a 5150 is called, the Family Education and Resource Center recommends for individuals to remove items from their homes that could be perceived as a weapon, and turn on all the lights so as not to be perceived as a threat. This brings the question of how someone who is going through a mental health crisis is supposed to rid their house of all weapons, and make their own house a safe space for the police who should be trained in dealing with these things peacefully and disarming individuals. We have a case kind of locally in San Jose where Butkauti Tran was shot and killed while waving a vegetable peeler at a police officer while experiencing a psychotic episode. And these issues make it clear that seeking treatment is not always an option. People fear for their lives because of how those with mental illnesses are treated. So now we're going to take a little time to interview Shanae, a master's student in psychology. And Leanna is going to handle that for us.
My name is Shanae. I'm currently in the graduate program for social work here at CSUMB. And then I also received my bachelor's in psychology at CSUMB. A lot of my experience has been in both my internships and in my jobs. So once I graduated with my bachelor's degree, my first job was a social worker. And I was working at this place called Dorothy's Place here in Salinas. There's a lot of chronically homeless people that surround that area. A lot of them kind of deal with different like experiences, but you see a lot of people that have like mental health issues, they have substance abuse issues. They've just been living homeless. I've met people that have been homeless for 10 years. But while I was working as a social worker, we would have clients that were previously on the streets and they would receive transitional housing. And so my job was to help with case management. And this would be to get them connected to resources such as like Medi-Cal, CalFresh, getting connected with doctors. A lot of them have like physical impairments because they haven't been to the doctor in so many years. So that was like my first exposure to that world. And then from there, I ended up getting a job at Interim, which was really cool because there was more structure at Interim and there was a lot more like duties related to severe mental illness. When people have severe mental illness, that usually means that they have like a diagnosis that's a schizophrenia spectrum diagnosis. So there's different types of schizophrenia. So they usually have that, or they'll have bipolar disorder or major depressive disorder. And usually with those, psychosis is one of the symptoms. But basically, when you have a severe mental illness, it means that your daily life is heavily impacted by your symptoms. And so it makes it hard to kind of like maintain a job or take care of loved ones or even complete activities such as like eating, taking a shower, just kind of different things like that. So my position there was a mental health counselor, and I worked with clients that were either homeless or living in a residential crisis program. And so it was pretty neat because I would assist clients with like going to their psychiatric appointments. And it's kind of interesting to see the difference of when people are stabilized with medication, just how much improvement they receive like in their life. Like they're able to go to programs, to be consistent. Some of them start to maintain their own housing as well. So I got to do like brief interventions with some of the clients. And so we would do activities like that were related to like mindfulness or just kind of like changing, kind of like addressing the thoughts that are impacting them. Like some people like they experience anxiety and they don't know how to deal with it. So it's just kind of identifying like their fears and finding different ways for them to address it and relax themselves, either before they're about to have like an anxiety attack or what to do like during or after the fact. So I had a lot of experience with that. And then my job after that was a case manager, and this was for community health engagement. And they're also located here in Salinas. One of my internships I had was at a psychiatric health facility. It's called Telecare, and it's in Santa Cruz. And a lot of the clients there are brought in from the hospital. So let's say if a client is kind of having like a psychotic break, or maybe they try to commit suicide, they usually get taken into a hospital, and then they get put, if they're considered to be like a danger to themselves, a danger to others, or they're just like gravely disabled, which means like they're not eating at all, they're not showering, they're not taking care of themselves, they can be put on a psychiatric hold. That's where you hear like the 5150 holds. So they get taken to this this facility, and it just provides them like with a safe place to get stabilized. They want to really like maintain like the wellness of clients. They kind of like take away objects or things that they might be able to like hurt themselves with. So really when they're in that facility, it's just like chairs, you know, they have a bed, they have their access to a shower, but everything's kind of like scheduled, and it's just kind of like a routine. Like there's only a certain amount of people that can eat at a time. They have to take turns. Everything's like plastic, everything's protected. They have to ask for a lot of things that they need. So it can kind of get a little bit just kind of like uncomfortable and annoying for the clients because they literally kind of have to ask for everything.
So it's interesting that you bring up 5150, because in our project we actually highlight a 5150 case. So we speak upon how oftentimes when police officers are called to homes because the victim or the person at stake is considered a 5150 person, oftentimes they recommend that these people remove all weapons that are considered in all items that are considered weapons. But then there's a question at hand is that how are people supposed to remove things that are considered weapons, because they even consider kitchen utensils as weapons, but they're not in the mental state of mind to be able to even do something as such. So then when police officers come in, they don't see them as someone who's going through a mental health crisis, but instead they just treat them as another suspect or someone who is just a harm to them.
Yeah, that one gets tricky. One of the ways that they try to address that problem was they're actually now providing officers with mental health training, and they actually get like a certification. I want to say it's called a CIT, Crisis Intervention Team. And so either the officer themselves will receive the training. That way, when something like that happens, they know how to respond to the situation more appropriately and more safely for the person. But if not, there are other programs too in the county where like a social worker will actually be assigned to respond to a crisis situation like that. So if officers are called because someone, you know, is kind of going through one of those like situations, the social worker will collaborate with the officer. That way they have someone who's informed and experienced with mental health.
Thank you again, Shanae, for agreeing to be interviewed. We really appreciate you taking the time to support our podcast. So now we're going to talk a little bit about how mental illness and a lack of resources and support can lead to suicide. Suicide is a risk factor for those with mental illness. Suicide is defined as death caused by self-directed, injurious behavior with intent to die as a result of that behavior. Suicide is actually the 12th leading cause of death in the United States, with almost 46,000 people dying of suicide in 2020 and 1.2 million people attempting. The highest suicide rates within the United States are actually middle-aged white men and young adults. And men as a whole are the largest group that is affected by both mental illness and suicide. Over 6 million men suffer from depression per year. Male depression often goes undiagnosed, and men are more likely to report fatigue, irritability, loss of interest in work or hobbies, rather than feeling sadness or worthlessness. This is likely because of the lack of support that men face with mental illness. Oftentimes they're told to toughen up or be a man and hide their emotions. And as a society, we really need to be okay with everyone showing their emotions and everyone seeking help. We are now going to interview someone who has felt the effects of mental illness. And now would be a good time to mention that we're going to talk about some personal and emotional issues regarding mental illnesses, specifically suicide and how the families have felt because of it. This is an individual whose brother has sadly lost his battle with mental illness. He was being treated for bipolar disorder, but sadly took his own life. Alexander was able to interview his sister.
So we asked you to speak with us because you had a family member who lost their battle with depression, and I so greatly apologize for this, that they had been suffering for several years. Would you perhaps be able to kind of tell us a little bit about them?
Yes. My brother, he was such a bright, happy soul. No matter what he was battling against, he always had a big smile on him. My brother was the light of the room. He knew exactly how to make a negative situation into a positive one.
That's such a great description of your brother, Rosie, and I'm thankful that you're here to kind of, you know, proceed give his legacy a name and such. Just from the tears in your voice and everything, it makes me kind of emotional and feel for you. It's really a difficult subject.
Thank you.
Was he always, kind of presenting in a happy mood to you and your family?
Yes, he never showed any sadness. He never gave us any clues he was going to take his life. He never wanted to speak to us if he had any issues. He never wanted to bring up anything bad he was going through. I just wish he would have opened up more, talking to us, even if he didn't want to go to the hospital or to a mental health crisis center. I would have wanted him to open up to us more, but he always remained happy and joyful. But sometimes he would shut us out and remain distant for weeks. He voiced his wishes and needing space to deal with his emotions on his own. And as a family, we respected his wishes because regardless of how long it took, he always returned. He always returned when he felt better mentally.
Now, did you notice any changes before they decided to proceed with taking their life?
My brother was in a relationship with a woman he later married. She did not take his mental health seriously. She would antagonize him, which was strongly affected his mental health and increasing his suicidal ideations. His wife was unable to cope with his mental health battles and refused to educate herself and be a supportive partner. We began to notice that he was withdrawing from us and would shut us out for days until he felt better. My brother's wife would persistently hurt him, which my brother reached out to many places, including hospitals, inpatient facilities, and behavioral health organizations, but none seemed to take the severity of his depression into consideration, which led to 2 suicide attempts. For his first attempt, he swallowed a whole bottle of medication but was unsuccessful, and he was rushed to the hospital where his stomach was pumped. The doctors deemed him not a danger to himself or others, and it was an accident. How does one accidentally swallow an entire bottle of prescription medication? The doctors discharged him a day later. 3 weeks later, my brother was successful in his second attempt. My brother was desperate for medical help. When he passed away, a part of me died with him. This will always affect me. I how would I say, it's never going to be the same. Even though I'm here, I have to still continue to live my life daily. Our hearts will always be shattered. Please check on your loved ones, and push them to talk about their emotions. I'd rather have a conversation with you than cry at your funeral.
We again want to thank Rosie for honoring her brother and speaking for him today for this social issue. Our appreciation and compassion goes out to you and your family. Like Rosie's brother, many individuals do feel this lack of support from providers. And some organizations that are trying to fix that are the National Alliance on Mental Illness, or NAMI, and the JED Foundation. So NAMI started as a grassroots organization in the 70s and 80s, and they really advocated for people with mental illnesses, especially in the media. They focused on calling out corporations and entertainment networks for being insensitive towards people with mental illnesses, and they started the campaign You Are Not Alone, which illustrated mental illness in real life. Now they focus on support groups, education, and advocacy. You can find their website at nami.org. The JED Foundation started because a couple lost their son, Jed, to suicide. Since then, they have dedicated their lives to mental health awareness, specifically in schools. They work with schools and other programs to teach young adults about mental illness, to protect students and help them learn and build skills to handle mental health crises, and adopt healthy coping mechanisms. You can find their website at jedfoundation.org. So what can we do? The CDC lists 7 ways that would assist with preventing mental illness and the after effects. Those 7 ways are strengthening economic support, creating protective environments, improving access and delivery of suicide care, promoting healthy connections, teaching coping and problem-solving skills, identifying and supporting people at risk, and lessening the harms and preventing future risk. All of these, when implemented by individuals and institutions, can reduce the risk factors of mental illnesses. Again, we want to thank you all for listening to our podcast, and we hope you will be supportive of those close to you seeking help in the future. Check on your friends, check on your loved ones. I also want to thank all of my fellow teammates. We have Cassandra, our lead researcher, who also helped secure one of our interviews and assisted with that. Hector and Angela, our narrative editors. Alexander and Leanna, our lead interviewers. And thank you, Leanna, for securing one of our interviews as well. And I'm Johanna, the audio editor. Have a good one, check on the people you love, and don't be afraid to ask for help.
Wow, thank you. Such a thorough and compassionate podcast. So wonderful work, everybody. Let me see. Well, I just wanted to thank you all so much. It's been truly a joy getting to know each of you, and I hope that I get to meet you in person. You really should be proud of the podcasts that you created. These are very high quality, and all of the research and effort and energy and emotion that you put into these really came through. So thank you all so much. Just logistically, I'll be sending you reminders. Please make sure to get your timesheets, your MySLP timesheets to me today so I can make sure they're signed and you get credit for your service. And if there's any missing work or journals that you have, please turn those in. But thank you all so much. It's really been a joy getting to know each of you. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you so much. I hope you have a
Thank
really great
you.
winter break.
Thank you.
Hope to see you on campus sometime.
Thank you.
Happy New Year.
I'm gonna end the live stream here.